understand the events of the 2020 virus and the global lockdown, you need to have a broad understanding of how the world works. Strangely, most people don't know this, which is why most people didn't see straight through the events as they started between October 2019 and the first lockdowns in March 2020. Imagine that you wanted to take over the world. You'd have to know how the world works in order to derail it and hence take it over. So let's look at the parts and then look at which parts depend on the other parts the most and which parts are the most powerful and hence the most important to own and control. Then I'm going to show you something amazing, which is how to take over the world invisibly without the news channels or the governments even knowing what's happening, and better to get the media and the governments working in lockstep with you. To start with, let's look at one imaginary country. Let's picture that we are doing a street survey, stopping people and asking them, who runs this country? And what are the most important parts to this country that the country needs the most? I bet the top 10 answers would be something like, the government runs the country, of course, and the politicians argue over what policies we should all follow. Okay, so let's put governments and politics in this box. Then we ask, what are the key parts running our country? And the answers would be the structure, which is schools, hospitals, roads, laws, police, courts and prisons, the armed forces, the energy providers. So yes, that all fits under that structure. I bet some people would talk about welfare and how we look after people who can't look after themselves, or people who need some help. Yes, so yeah, welfare makes it onto the picture. And at some stage, I bet food production would make it onto the list. And depending on what country we're talking about, maybe even mining of precious metals or important commodities. More enlightened people might hint or mention banks and finance as a key part of running the country properly. Now we're getting to the heart of it. But right smack in the middle of what almost nobody but the most awake of people would say is the nightly news channels and the media, the information providers. If you want to take over a country, all you have to do is control the money, which is essentially the banks and the news media. That's it. If you have control of those two things, you can be the puppet master and control everything else. Politicians need voters so they can keep their jobs. That's easy to understand, but much easier to miss is that politicians are human too, and if you own the information channels, you can influence the minds of the politicians just as easily. Most countries are dominated by 2 or 3 main news channels. There can be hundreds of news outlets, yet they can nearly always be traced to 2 or 3 corporate owners. If you own a major news corporation and you dislike the policies of the head of one of your country's political parties, you can destroy them. That's a known fact. So it should come as no surprise when leaders of political parties go out of their way to make good relationships with heads of news and media companies. So if a media mogul says this virus is terrible and failing to act quickly would bring terrible judgment from the electorate, to all politicians would sit up and take notice. In short, the media heads are further up the way the world works than the politicians. Another way of describing this is that politicians are terrified of the media. Today, the worldwide media is controlled by a tiny group of people. We'll talk about them soon, but for now, I want to prove to you that these people control every major news channel there is. To illustrate this, let's look at how the news in the USA is completely controlled. I'll play you a video now.
Headley.
And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our greatest responsibility is to serve our
Treasure Valley communities,
the El Paso, Las Cruces communities,
Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.
But we are concerned about troubling trend of irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country.
Plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and
false news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these stories simply aren't true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 Now, what are the chances of every single one of them saying exactly the same thing? So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury of the world, on the change that the charge that the world's media is controlled, I rest my case and I will move on to the next charge of complete financial control, incidentally by the same people. Now, I need to explain to you something that could not only fill books, but could fill entire libraries. And to make it worse, this is regarded by many as one of the most boring subjects ever, banking and finance. Stay with me because I'm going to make this interesting and super simple. I haven't got time in this video to go into detail, but everything can be backed by volumes of facts. The best resource that won't send you to sleep is the book called The Creature from Jekyll Island by Edward Griffin. This book reads like a spy novel. It makes otherwise a dry subject really interesting. I started with this book, but I ordered the audio version, so I cheated and listened to that first and then went through the book for the bits I found almost unbelievable but true. This book is summarized. It's also on you can find it on YouTube. It's summarized by the author. In 1815, straight after the Battle of Waterloo, Nathan Rothschild hijacked the UK banking system. He knew the result of the battle before the government and used his information to take control of the entire UK financial system. The Bank of England is the oldest of the world's central banks. Central banks have tricked their countries into giving them a complete monopoly of printing paper money backed by nothing, which is known as fiat money. Central banks literally have a fake license to print money. It's no different than owning a giant photocopying machine that prints paper notes. If you own such a machine, how often would you want it to keep printing money from nothing? The printed paper money is lent to you and me for interest on hard assets like our houses. If we fail to pay, the bank takes possession of our real asset when they created the money literally from fresh air. That's why the book The Creature from Jekyll Island is so good, because it exposes this enormous scam. Even more surprising is that central banks are mostly privately owned companies. They're not government run, they're run by private individuals. Imagine how much money the very few families that control central banks have accumulated over hundreds of years from printing paper money out of fresh air and charging interest on it. So these few families today own all of the media companies. The word history can be broken into two: his and story. History is written for people who have won the day's events. So people that own the news, and you see that, and that includes Facebook, YouTube, Google, even your local radio news broadcast. These people literally control the way the stories are told to you and me. Now, with all the money these few families have, They own every piece of the structure we previously mentioned. They control what our children are taught. They own the biggest companies. They dictate welfare, food supply, mining, energy. They control the World Health Organization. They dominate all aspects of the health industry, especially pharmaceuticals and vaccines. Because they control the media and the entire money supply, governments are literally dictated by them. So although it seems like a truly massive task to take over the world, it was really much simpler than that. It was a matter of being in the right place at the right time in history by owning the fraudulent printing presses of central banks, and hence owning the media. The world was literally enslaved, and that's how the world has worked for the last 200 or 300 years or so. Now, before you feel helpless, small and surrounded, there's good news. Before I give you this news, I want to show you how this has happened in every country in the world. I want to play this quick video.
Once upon a time, there were 100 million people. They had different interests, different beliefs, different occupations, but for the most part, they got along pretty well. Then one day, a gang of a few hundred people showed up. Need to zoom in some more to see them. I know they're there somewhere. Zoom in. There they are. And this gang of a few hundred said to the throng of 100 million, "From now on, you all have to give us a cut of everything you earn."
This is an accurate graphical comparison between the number of American taxpayers and the number of U.S. congressmen.
And the throng said, "Gosh, do we have to give you a cut of what we earn?" And the gang of a few hundred said, "Yes, you have to." And the throng said, "Well, okay, I guess we have to." And one little troublemaker asked, "What if we don't?" The gang of a few hundred didn't like this and said, "If you do not comply, we shall unleash upon you our legions of enforcers." And the throng cried, "Oh no, please don't. We will comply, we will pay."
This is an accurate graphical comparison between the number of American taxpayers and the total number of IRS employees.
Time went by and the gang of a few hundred said, "Now we want more of what you earn." And this kept happening over and over again until eventually some of the throng were paying almost half of what they earned to the gang. Whenever the gang demanded more, the throng would say, "Golly, we're already having a tough time. Do we really need to give you even more?" And the gang always said, "Yes, you must, or we shall unleash our legion of enforcers." Now the gang of a few hundred was getting trillions of dollars every year, spending it on wars and pyramid schemes, giving away goodies to their friends, buying influence, and doing lots of other things. And some of the throng started saying, "We don't really like the war you're waging with the money we give you. Do we really have to be paying for that?" And the gang said, "Yes, we demand it. Don't make us send out our legion of enforcers." And some of the throng said, "You're taking our money and giving it to huge corporations and giant banks, and some people who just don't want to work. A lot of these things we don't like." And the gang said, "We don't care. We will decide how to spend it. You just do as you're told, or else." And the throng said, "Okay, I guess we have to." But eventually the throng got so fed up, so angry, that they took a drastic step. One day they said to the gang, "We don't like what you're doing. We want a new gang." And after pouring a huge amount of time and money into the effort, they replaced the gang with a new gang. Then the throng pleaded with the new gang, "Now, at long last, can we keep our own money, or at least keep more of it?" And the new gang said, "Sorry, but after much discussion, we've decided that you can't. You have to keep giving us what you've been giving, in fact, a little bit more than before." The throng was distraught and said, "This is dreadful. But after all, what choice do we have? I mean, they say we must comply, and they have that scary legion of enforcers. We're powerless against them. We'd better just do as we're told." So they did as they were told, got poorer and poorer, and lived miserably ever after. But after all, what else could they have done? What power could this throng possibly have compared to this gang of a few hundred and their enforcers? What chance would this thing have against this thing? How could these 100 million people ever hope to successfully resist the awesome power of this tiny little dot? In case anyone missed this, let's review. Here's them, here are their enforcers, here's us. Them, us. Them, us. Does anything about this seem just a little strange to you? Are you perhaps wondering, why does the throng need the permission of the dot to do anything? Why do these people feel the need to ask this tiny little dot if they can keep more of what they earn? Why would they spend year after year literally begging for lower taxes from this little dot? Is this dot just really darn intimidating? Is it very persuasive in its reasoning? To be blunt, why would this throng give a rodent's backside what this tiny little dot wanted? The fact that this tiny dot has the gall to issue such demands to such a throng is pretty startling in and of itself. But what is far more amazing is that the throng obeys this minuscule little parasitic gang of control freaks. What could possibly explain this? Let's ask the dot. This is how it works. When we, the dot, take your money and spend it on things you don't like, we're representing you. In fact, though you're not allowed to actually keep your own money, you're allowed to decide which little dot will steal half of what you earn. So that really means that you're in charge and that you're agreeing to give us your money. In fact, we, the dot, are serving you when we take your money and spend it on things you don't like. And so you should thank us and treat us with great respect and honor for having robbed you on your behalf for your own good in order to serve you by doing things you don't want us to do. So there you have it. I hope that cleared everything up for you.
If you're not entirely satisfied with the dot's explanation of things, you really should read the book, The Most Dangerous Superstition, available now at Amazon.com.
We, the masses, outnumber them by a factor of tens of millions to one. These tiny few people are very threatened by our numbers, and they want to not only control us, they want to drastically reduce our numbers and further subjugate us and so as to control us more. Why is that good news? It's because they've recently shown their hand beyond all reasonable doubt, and now we can expose them and bring them down. This tiny group of people have many names, but I prefer the word cabal. Be in no doubt, the world we live in 2020 is controlled by the cabal. I will in this video series provide you with evidence that takes this statement beyond any doubt. I will give you now 2 good indicators for you to study so you can come to the same conclusion. Firstly, there are virtually no real investigative journalists in our media. They are nearly all paid actors reading scripts. If a so-called reporter wanted to destroy their career, all they had to do was criticise the vaccine manufacturer. That is instant dismissal, clear evidence of control. Secondly, after you study the top doctors and scientists vocally opposing almost everything about COVID-19, is it reasonable to assume that every government in the world has access to these voices of dissent? The answer, of course, is yes. Of course they do. The fact that almost every government in the world is ignoring these highly credible and accurate doctors and scientists, and worse, the governments are turning a blind eye to media censoring them, which is a clear breach of free speech. All this again is blindingly clear evidence that even our governments are controlled, which when I figured that out, answered a lot of my questions and opened my eyes to the only reasonable conclusion that all governments are now actually criminally negligent and not fit for purpose. Their time's up. One thing that made me much happier was that I discovered that there are many people who are very smart and organised, who are determined to bring the cabal down, and there are various strategies in play to do just that. The cabal knows this, they know about that, and that explains why they're panicking and pushing things through way faster than their normal, slow, invisible pace. This again is good, because sensible people are seeing through a lot of the nonsense being imposed, and they're waking up. And when they start correctly thinking that something is not right, they start to see what's going on. One approach to dismantle the cabal is explained very well in the book The Most Dangerous Superstition by Larkin Rose, a short 200-page read which will change almost everyone's life for the better who reads it. The rest of the videos on this channel are mostly devoted to presenting you with undeniable evidence that the so-called pandemic that hit the news in early 2020 is nothing more than an agenda to cull the population, destroy the free enterprise economy, and completely enslave those that remain. Although that claim may surprise you, I am confident the evidence and scientific facts that I will present to you, my goal is to make you laugh when governments on the news say they're led by the science, which is nothing short of a lie. We, the awake ones, have the world's best scientists on our side, and we have unquestionable evidence of the cabal's agenda, and on this channel I'm going to prove that to you. I'm going to leave you with bad news and good news. The bad news is that the cabal is aware it's crunch time. If they don't reduce the global population massively and totally subjugate us all, they will lose their grip on us forever. So they're full out distracting us with fear about a virus, which I'm going to get into a lot more detail on this channel. If they succeed and with their virus agenda, this will happen. Our freedom will disappear completely. Our children will never enjoy life like we have. Human DNA will be changed, and our entire species will face extinction. The species that lives and remains will not be able to reproduce outside of a laboratory, and certainly will not be regarded as human. The species, your great-grandchildren, will be slaves for eternity. The good news is that although the masses are hypnotized because the cabal is in overdrive, we don't need to wake them up all at once. Research has repeatedly shown that an entire country's opinion can be switched with just 3.5% of the population in favour of whatever that switch is. All you have to do, all you and I have to do, is wake up 3 or 4 people out of every 100. So again, I'm begging you in all seriousness to literally save your life and your family's life by going through everything here on this channel and registering for the resistance. This is where real heroes will be made in the resistance. I'll see you on the next video.